All right, just about 5 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I've said this many, many times. It's easy to see, actually. Young people change the world. They really do. When we are, as human beings, when we are 17, 18, 19, 20 maybe, we start to want to do things differently than our parents' generation did them, and the music is different, and the clothing is different, and the hair is different. And we always want to change the world so that it is a better world, right? So is what we don't like. There are certain things about the one we were brought up in that we just want to change it. Sometimes drastically, sometimes a little. You could look at the rock and roll generation. You could look at the punk era generation, or maybe even what's happening now, the hip hop generation. I don't know. But it is funny how music and fashion are two of the key elements of the changes that are about to happen, or not. Sometimes you look back and you say, did we actually make a difference? And I think you probably could make an argument that the changes did actually take hold. But then again, human behavior is as human behavior is, and we all seem to slip back sometimes into what once was. Stacy Russo is a librarian, a poet, a writer, an associate professor at Santa Ana College in Santa Ana, California. She's a contributor to the Shaffrey Review, the Feminist Collections, the Library Journal, American Libraries, Counterpoise, feminist teacher, and very accomplished author. Her book, and if you're looking at the podcast, you see the cover of the book. I got that off of Amazon. The book is called We Were Going to Change the World. Interviews with women from the 1970s and 1980s, Southern California punk rock scene. Oh my God, I love this. Stacy, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Were you a punk rock girl in the 70s or 80s?
I definitely was. In the 1980s here in Fullerton, California.
And in what way? Were you a singer or just a fan of the musical style? What?
I was a fan of the music, and I also did something called a fanzine, which is a self-published magazine or booklet with my friends called Anti-Establishment.
Nice.
And, yeah, so we had political articles and band interviews and things of that nature in there. You can imagine, we were about 16, 17 at the time.
But it sounds like we were going to change the world. Almost implies that it didn't happen. But I think you did. I think there was some changes, or were some changes that happened, and it's almost like everything else. There are good things that come out of everything.
That's true. The title of the book, We Were Going to Change the World, comes from a longer quote from one of the women I interviewed, Maxine Cervenka. And the longer quote is, "We thought we were going to change the world. I thought we were going to revolutionize the way men and women reacted with each other in politics, art, culture, and music." That's pretty much where that title comes from. But you could definitely say that a lot of things were changed from the punk rock scene. What we see, for example, so much in the culture now with the do-it-yourself movement, that's definitely coming out of punk rock, I feel. My example is self-publishing the little magazine, for example, and just not waiting for permission to start a band or create art or dress how you want.
Right, yeah. Well, and
now you see.
I'm a bit older than you, but at the same time, I remember during that era the idea that you did not have to stand in front of a music executive and get their okay. You just went out and did it yourself, which I thought was outstanding. That's how rock and roll started. Because rock and roll wasn't making anybody any money, so the kids in those days, they just did it, and then it started making money, and next thing you know, all the suits come into the picture.
Yeah.
Right, that's true. I mean, it's hard to always define, a movement or, something like punk rock, but one thing you can definitely say is it was about freedom. It was about being out there, not waiting for permission, and just creating what you want.
And I think
we need more of that.
and I think punk rock was more about the women than about the fellas, about their expression, I think.
That's great that you say that because it is sometimes characterized as being male dominated. A lot of the bands were definitely men, when you went to shows. But this book illustrates that there were a lot of women involved in the scene. Sometimes women's stories aren't given the same exposure as men's stories. So this book gives you 37 women's experiences from punk rock, and several of them were very influential musicians, photographers, journalists, and so on.
And that's really wonderful that you went that you did the variety and not just staying in the niche of the musician.
Right, and I wasn't sure how that would be received. It's a little different approach than you see sometimes in historical examinations of things. But the great thing is that people have really loved that about it. And, I mean, being punk rock, you can't just focus on the famous or the more well-known individuals. You need to really capture the entire scene, or it wouldn't be punk rock. So that's what I tried to do.
There are names I didn't recognize on your list, but is Stella Paul McCartney's daughter? The Stella you're talking about? Oh, okay.
No, Stella's actually a DJ out here in Los Angeles. And she's had a show on a station called KXLU for, I think, almost 30 years, around 30 years now. And so she would play punk rock even very early on.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
The changes manifested themselves in music, and the changes manifested themselves in fashion. Were the changes that you wanted socially, what the changes that you and the other women that you interviewed, were they okay? So the vision was to see the whole world change, or at least all of society change. Was it happening in like microcosms for you, like in your little world, like your neighborhood or your clique, if you could? Was it? Was everybody living up to the future the view of the future? Does that make sense? Am I asking it right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is why the title is "We Were Going to Change the World," and it's not "We Changed the World," you could say, because we just talked earlier about things that were changed. But if you look at some of the social or political aspects related to maybe racism or, human rights and animal rights, a lot of that is unfortunately the same. But when it comes to people in the scene back then and myself and the women I interviewed, we definitely live our lives the same way as we did back then. So we're still the same politically. Decisions I make every day with what I'm going to eat or buy or treat people, it all stems from punk rock.
Well, do you think some of the women that are coming out now with the Me Too movement may have been influenced, even though if it is now 2017, do you think maybe they were influenced by the work that you and the other ladies did, in the 70s and 80s?
I think so. I mean, I think there's always an evolution with things, right? So it doesn't just usually start from nothing. It's happens over time. And I think that people can get courage from that when they can see people before them, who did things.
Since you're a professor at Santa Ana College in California, did you include your students in this project, or do they have similar projects of their own?
I did not include the students in this project, but this project comes out of me going to an oral history workshop in San Francisco, and it was with an organization called Voice of Witness. And what I did after that workshop was this project, but I also interviewed some of my students who were getting ready to transfer to the university, and I want to go back and interview them again now and find out what happened, years later. Because most of my students are first-generation college students like me.
Tell me about the money part of the experience of the ladies who you interviewed. Were they successful financially, and did that matter?
I would say that they would probably be doing what they're doing regardless of money, which, is good and bad, and that's the reality of artists and writers and so on.
Yeah.
You have this desire to do something and you're going to do it, and unfortunately, usually you can't, make an entire living doing that. So a lot of them have other jobs they do in addition to, of course, being a musician or if they're a journalist still, they're kind of piecing together their work.
Yeah. So what are they doing now? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, definitely. So some of them are teachers. Stella's still a DJ. One of them is actually a dancer who's pretty successful going around the world as a belly dancer, believe it or not. One is an artist. I'm just trying to think now. And then there are all other various careers, hairstylist, pet groomer,
Wow.
Receptionist. So it's all over the place. And another one I just remembered is another professor like me, and she's a counselor at a community college. So all different.
Was drugs part of their scene when you were interviewing them? Because, you hear about the male punk rockers, and then a lot of them OD'd and stuff like that. Did the females sort of not get into that and feel that was that drugs were an unnecessary part of their demeanor to be creative?
There are a few women who specifically state something like that. There's one, a photographer, Alison Braun, who made a point of not using any substances because of her expensive camera and wanting to, be aware of what she was doing and her surroundings. But it is a portrait of a lot of different people, very diverse, and some of them for sure have struggled with drugs and alcohol.
So you've taken your writing skills and your writing talent, and you've pursued writing throughout your whole life. You started a magazine. Now you've written a book. What's happened between then and now? Have you always written about this culture?
I've written about different things, but you know how it is with our lives. You can see a connection with everything you do.
Yeah.
So, even what I chose to do as a librarian is because I wanted to have an occupation that I felt was helping the world. So my first book was actually on libraries in California, and then my second book was the writings of a very influential teacher I had. And my next book is about activism, and then this punk rock book is, in the middle of all that. So I've always...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just said I've always been writing, and it's been different topics, but to me, I see the connection.
Yes, I was just going to say, that's what I was going to say, that I see the thread of your life. I see that you have viewed writing as a way not only to express yourself, but also to express your support for things that are, kind of pushing back on protocol, I guess.
Yes, you could definitely say that. My brother once said I'm always kind of pushing the envelope, But I've also found that one of my favorite things is bringing other people's stories to an audience. And doing this project has really made me want to do more of that. So I do have 10 interviews in my next book, and then I'm thinking, okay, what's the next book? And I think I want to do another one like this one, but possibly with interviews of activists that are doing things in their communities.
Were the women that you chose for the book, were they readily acceptable to your idea, or did you have to convince them?
Yeah, so what I did initially, which is going to sound very much like a do-it-yourself punk rock thing, is I made a flyer. I made a flyer about the project, and I put the flyer up in different places in Orange County and LA, and then I posted it on Facebook, and it was shared so much that I didn't have to do an ad or do anything else to get women because I started to hear from them. So a lot of the women in the book contacted me after seeing the flyer about the project. And then some of the more well-known women, I reached out to them, and only one person out of all the women did not want to participate. So overwhelmingly, it was incredibly supportive and positive. And some of the women now are my friends, which I wasn't anticipating. Yeah, and you know, they've been to my home. We've gone out for dinner. I've had a few book events, and a good number of them have also come to the events with me. So you can't ask for more than that, really. I was thinking of it as a research project, but it became very personal and emotional for me right away with the women. I loved them. So it's great to now have all these new friends, too.
So if you change the title from "We Were Going to Change the World" to "We Changed Our World," would that be accurate? Did the women feel like maybe we didn't change the whole world, but our own personal worlds were changed?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. And in the interviews, over and over again, the women say that either, you know, punk rock saved their life or it influenced so many aspects of their life today. So definitely so. That could be the alternate title. That could be our secret title.
Do they have families? I mean, was there anything that they changed in their life from saying, "Oh, I'm going to do this forever and not have children," and now they've got a new lease on life and have kids?
That's a great question that no one's asked me that specific question, but it gets to something that I discovered when I was doing the project that I wasn't anticipating. So, yes, so definitely some of the women I interviewed do have children and do live in more of a traditional marriage, but overwhelmingly, over half of the women never had children. And although most of them have had male partners and some of them have been married, they just didn't have the interest really. And all except for one of them didn't, at least with me, show any sadness related to that. They were so busy with their lives. They're still so busy doing things, creating things. It just wasn't something that they wanted to do. So they made a decision to not do that. But their lives are still very fulfilling. So that's really interesting. You know, that's definitely a higher percentage than the regular population. And I think that, you know, they were probably already different before punk rock, too. I thought of this as well because you have to be a certain kind of person to want to go into a punk rock club. You know, a lot of people would run the other way. They were already a little different to start out. But I think being in that environment and having that community showed the women that there are different ways they could live their lives and they could really pursue a life however they want it. And maybe for that reason, they didn't feel the need to follow a more traditional path the whole way through their life.
Wow. You're so insightful.
The hippie movement, the two words that come to mind from the hippie movement, peace and love.
Yes.
If you could narrow down the punk movement to a couple of words, it doesn't have to be two or three, but what would it be?
I would say freedom, intensity, political action, and maybe we'll throw in raw and soul in there too.
Raw and soul.
See now,
Yeah.
I think okay, and that was an interesting answer you gave us because I think maybe you did change the world because you do see a lot of political action, especially among women that you didn't see really back in the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, just considering, I'm sure you saw the march last weekend and then the one last year, how huge those marches are. So, and, you know, at those marches, you also see women with different colored hair and all that. So you can see, you know, back in the 80s or 70s, the only people who would have hair like that were punk rockers. So.
Well,
That's true.
We work in a mall, so we have a big broadcast window, and I've seen women in their 70s with purple hair. I mean, they're just all over the place now.
Right. So there is definitely that freedom with your appearance, at least, that we can see for sure. And yeah, there is definitely a lot of political action as well. I think, though, that, things cycle, and there's still a lot of people who would not really want to participate in that culture or share those political beliefs as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But, yeah.
I wonder if there were any of the punk rock ladies, specifically, who were very successful, whose look on life actually changed because of the success, the money. I don't know if Deborah Harry fits into that category. I don't know if you consider her punk, but she seemed to be on the edge of that. Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that maybe success in some ways ruined the dream for a lot of people who were able to be fortunate enough to have that success?
Well, I think success for an artist is always kind of good and bad, and I think a lot of artists, as we know, end up having a difficult time with success because there's a certain process with whatever it is, music or, painting or writing, that has a real rawness to it. There are aspects to it that you are also, especially as a writer, you're alone creating. Once there's fame involved, that really does change, of course, everything about your life.
Yeah.
But a lot of those women, I'm sure that they are still very much rooted, I feel, in the punk rock world, in terms of, if they've made it this far and they're that successful. Maybe someone like even Kim Gordon, I don't know if you know her, but she's from the band Sonic Youth.
Okay.
So very successful.
Yeah.
But I think these are still punk rock ladies.
You truly are your own mentor. I can't imagine somebody that would be your mentor because you're such a free thinker and you're very exciting. And it's wonderful that you're exuding all of this onto your students. You're their mentor.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Well, I do feel that I have the best job in the world being a librarian and a professor at a community college. And one of the things that I really hope to do is inspire people. So even this project, whenever anyone hears me talk about it, I just want people to know that they can do a project like this too, in the punk rock vein of it all,
Do you see it, is there any movement today, any maybe young musical groups today that seem to be carrying the torch?
That's an interesting question too, because working at the community college, their students are all different ages, but the majority are still between 18 to 24, you would say. And a lot of them actually wear the punk rock T-shirts. And I talked to them about it because these are bands that they were not obviously even born yet,
Exactly.
And they have these, and some of the T-shirts are from bands that were even kind of obscure punk rock bands. I mean, you really had to be involved to know these bands. But they know them, and they love the music, and they go to punk rock shows, and I've thought a lot about it, and I don't know if there's been a movement like punk rock. I mean, of course, you mentioned the hippies, and then before that, maybe like the beatniks,
Oh, yeah.
And then, and then after all that, punk rock, where it was like this whole cultural movement. There was the art and the music and the politics and people getting together. And I don't know if there's been something like that. So I think maybe that's why the young kids are still gravitating toward the punk rock band.
Maybe, yeah, you might be right. You might be right about that. Thank you for being on the air with us. That was fun. The book is called We Were Going to Change the World, and you can get it on Amazon. I found it on Amazon. Do you want to give us a website?
The publisher is Santa Monica Press, and if you go there, you can actually even read a few pages of the book. I think on Amazon you can too.
Okay.
But you can definitely go there, and there's also a Facebook page for the book, and it's just We Were Going to Change the World, and that's a possibility as well. but there's so much out there about the book online now. So it's awesome.
Well, and we got one more thing to put online, and it's this interview. We'll put this up. It's been live up until now, and then we'll wrap it up and make it a podcast as a recorded version in about 2 hours. Thank you so much,
That's
Stacy,
great.
for being on the air with us today. That was fun.
Thank you, and have a beautiful day.
Thank you. You too. We will be right back.
Fox News Radio, I'm Chris Foster. President Trump meeting with British Prime Minister Theresa May at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. He says stories about them getting along just aren't true and that he has tremendous respect for her.
I think the feeling is mutual from the standpoint of liking each other a lot.
The president also sat down with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today. The magician David Copperfield denies drugging and sexually assaulting a 17-year-old model in 1988. He responded to Brittany Lewis's accusation just before the story was published, saying, "Please don't rush to judgment."
In a Facebook post, Copperfield explained how being falsely accused of sexually assaulting beauty contestant winner Lacey Carroll in 2007 turned his life upside down. No charges were filed against Copperfield, and Carroll was arrested for falsely accusing the magician.
Fox's Jacqueline Carl, this current accuser, says she's